Tensions in the Middle East between Israel and Iran intensified this past week. Iran is refusing to surrender or halt its nuclear aspirations. Will the U.S. get directly involved with its own strike on Iran? And is a regime change even possible? With analysis, I'm joined by defense and counterterrorism analyst John Rossomando. John, thank you for being here. Your thoughts on this escalation of the past week? U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee is warning Americans to evacuate by air and sea as the crisis intensifies. There are now reports that senior U.S. officials are prepping for some kind of attack on Iran in the coming days. I have to say I'm troubled by all this talk of regime change because it never worked, John. Hussein, Gaddafi, the Shah of Iran in 1953. You call this republicanism. What does that mean?
Well, republicanism means putting a government that is, supposedly elected and that has no internal legitimacy. I was out in front in 2003 with Karl Rove against our invasion of Iraq because I knew it wouldn't work. But in Iran, you have Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, who polls from like 2022 says enjoys better than 80% approval. So there's a legitimacy factor there, and he, came out the other day saying that.
Yeah, don't get ahead of me, John. I'm going to go there in a minute. Hold on, as I want to play that for the audience. Let's talk about the conflict first, and then what might happen here. But I'm worried, though, about the talk of regime change, no matter who it is. But what would it mean for the greater conflict if the U.S. takes an active role alongside Israel and hits Iran?
Well, what it would mean if the U.S. were to get involved, it would mean the end of Iran's nuclear program, because you have the Fordow plant where they've been enriching uranium that only the United States has the capability of resolving. But then you would possibly have, Iran has agents inside the U.S. They could do something. The Iranians could close the Strait of Hormuz. I think that there's a lot going on here, and it's really something that, the Israelis have air supremacy, but the Iranians still have a lot of missiles that can do a lot of damage.
Israeli officials say Iran has used a multi-warhead missile, a cluster bomb, to strike greater target areas, including hospital and civilian centers, as this conflict intensifies. While Israeli Prime Minister, he continues to say, Benjamin Netanyahu, they are focusing on strategic targets, particularly nuclear facilities. What are you hearing about the military focus of each side at this moment? And do you buy the information we're being given? We're all getting at this point.
Well, I buy the information that we're getting, but I've also heard that the Israelis have been less than strategic in terms of, where they've been bombing in Tehran. There have been civilian collateral damage. They've been going after regime assets. But I spoke with an Iranian defense analyst earlier today, who said that the one agent that could change the regime, the regular military, has been hurt in terms of its air assets. And at the same time, the Iranians are targeting apartment buildings and using these cluster bombs to, create more havoc.
The President Trump, is considering the use of direct U.S. strikes on Iran. Now, critics of U.S. involvement, John, would say Iran poses no direct threat to the United States or the U.S. homeland, so why get involved? But I want to start with the threat posed by Iran. Do you believe that it poses a threat to the United States?
Well, the Iranian intelligence is involved with the drug cartels. Iran backs Venezuela, which has sent Tren de Aragua, that President Trump's been talking about. You have Hezbollah assets inside the United States. And let's not forget that the Iranians sent a hit squad against President Trump last year, according to the Justice Department.
Yeah. Well, President Trump, despite that, and yes, you remember the Biden administration said that there were hit squads of targeting President Trump, then candidate Trump. But the president has insisted he doesn't want the U.S. to get involved in a shooting war with Iran, while at the same time insisting that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. On Wednesday, President Trump was asked about an exchange with President Macron of France during the G7. And this was regarding a possible ceasefire with Iran. The president responded this way.
You had a bit of a row with President Emmanuel Macron of France the other day, the G7,
No,
it sounded like.
he's a nice guy. Look, he said I was going back home to make a ceasefire. Not a ceasefire. We're long beyond ceasefire. And I said, why do you say that? Why would you say ceasefire? It's a bad term to use. Because a ceasefire means like everything's going swimmingly, we'll take a little time off. It's not. We're not looking for a ceasefire. We're looking for a total, complete victory. Again, you know what the victory is. No nuclear weapon.
Now, John, your thoughts on that exchange? I mean, is the president basically saying that U.S. involvement is inevitable, particularly when Iran's refusing to surrender or give up its nuclear capability?
Well, that's certainly on the table. I mean, President Trump would like the Ayatollah to back down, but they've been telegraphing for a long time that they have no interest in giving up their enrichment program, which is Trump's red line. I think the Israelis are more than capable of handling it militarily, but back in the 1980s, Reagan sank half the Iranian Navy. You had strikes against Gaddafi, and then strikes against Iraq by the Clinton administration. We're only talking about a very limited U.S. role. The Israelis can handle the bulk of it.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah al-Khamenei, rejected U.S. calls for surrender in the face of these blistering attacks by Israel. And he warned that any military involvement by the Americans would cause irreparable damage to them. John, should we expect to see some kind of strike on U.S. installations or here at home, should the U.S. get involved in this thing and actually engages?
Well, the United States has withdrawn a lot of forces from Al Udeid, which is our main air base in Qatar. You have reports of blood being brought to the Middle East to deal with these attacks. And also the U.S. fleet has been taken out of Manama, Bahrain, to be out of range. So we're taking precautions. And I would not also rule out Iran putting its sleeper agents into action on U.S. soil.
You think that's the most likely retaliation, not an attack, necessarily a military attack, but a domestic terrorism event?
Well, you'd probably possibly see both. I mean, just like we saw the Iranians use missiles against U.S. troops when President Trump killed Qasem Soleimani in 2020. You'd see something similar against U.S. bases. And our Gulf allies are terrified of Iran targeting them for being allied with the U.S.
Okay, so what in your estimation would be the best approach for the U.S. to take here? Trump keeps talking about a deal. I mean, you would prefer to see the U.S. employ its intelligence forces in a more clandestine way in Iran with no direct involvement. What would that look like? Well,
it would look potentially like President Reagan's use of the CIA with solidarity, back in the 1980s. When Reagan was working with John Paul II. It would, Reagan and the CIA provided fax machines to solidarity that ultimately brought an end to communism. It would, include providing organizational capabilities to the regime opposition led by Prince Reza Pahlavi. It would include Starlinks. They're talking about sending thousands of Starlinks into Iran. I mean, those are things that would look like. So that way you have the Iranian people informed and able to take matters into their own hands. And then you would also potentially have the Israelis intervening.
Yeah, well, we saw with the Green Revolution years ago when Barack Obama had an opportunity, when there were uprisings in Iran, and we kind of missed the opportunity there. But that civil society, it seems they're still very unhappy. But let's talk about that for a moment. You have the exiled crown prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. And he, by the way, who lives in Virginia, he's been in the D.C. area for many, many years.
Maryland.
He issued this statement.
میهنانم جمهوری اسلامی به پایان خود رسیده و در حال سقوط است. آنچه آغاز شده برگشت ناپذیر است. تنها یک خیزش همگانی لازم است تا این کابوس برای همیشه باشد که به زودی در کنار شما باشم.
John, your thoughts on the role of the exiled Iranian royal family here? Is the Islamic regime in as dire straits as he's portraying? And is there a chance that Pahlavi could be restored to the throne? And would that bring stability?
Well, I think that first of all, the regime's grip is getting tenuous, especially due to the Israeli strikes and rumors that the Ayatollah himself is on Netanyahu's target list. But he provides the same sort of symbolism that maybe John Paul II provided for Poles during the dark days of communism. And the Iranian people are tired of this regime. I spoke with an Iranian friend who spoke with somebody inside the country, and that friend was like, well, I'd love to raise a statue of Netanyahu in Tehran. I mean, if you look at the fact that 1,000 Iranians have signed up with the Mossad, that says a lot about the influence of the regime. People in Iran want it gone, and we just need to help them to tip it over like we helped, in 1989 bring down communism.
Yeah, there is an historic precedent for return to power, but very few. In Spain in 1975, Francisco Franco died, and then the deposed Prince Juan Carlos was installed as king. He was an absolute monarch for a few years, and then he transitioned to a democracy. Pahlavi has said in the past that should he return, he'd be like Juan Carlos. John, are we about to see a similar moment?
I think that if we can help the people of Iran free themselves from the besieged militia that oppresses them, maybe the Israelis can do that. We would end up seeing him talking. There's been talk about the regular army officers talking with Reza Pahlavi about restoring him to the throne and recognizing him. Kind of way that the army recognized the Ayatollah back in '79. So there is a very strong possibility of that happening.
But the Persians are only a very bare, I think they have a bare majority there, right? It's like 51%, just over half are Persians. Everybody else is Islamic. So don't you have the same tensions at play?
Well, you do have tensions between the Persians, the Baluchis, Kurds, other minorities. But if you have somebody like Reza Pahlavi, who's spent decades in the U.S., learned from our system, I think that he can bring these disparate groups together to build a parliament, to do what Juan Carlos did, to build a multi-ethnic, multi-party system in Iran that will bring peace and end Iran's involvement in violence and terrorism.
Why do you think Trump is giving himself this open window where he says, I'll make a decision in the next few weeks, that was just announced today, about whether to strike Iran directly or not?
Well, there's a lot of deliberation going on over, say, striking Fordow, because there's internal DOD assessments that said that maybe the 30,000-pound bunker buster might not do the job. So he also is somebody who wants to be sure that if he does it, you're going to have what I guess we call the bang for the buck. And he also probably wants to keep the Iranians guessing.
We will leave it there, John. The Arab Spring Ruse by John Rossomando is available at bookstores everywhere and online. John, thanks for your insight.
Thank you.